Hello there and welcome to Friday Night Fairy Tales with me, Violet Forget-Me-Not. Now, the story we're going to be reading this evening is called The Fairies. So, if you're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. There once lived a very bad-tempered and disagreeable widow who had 2 daughters. The eldest, called Fanchon, had the same bad temper as her mother and was both spiteful and lazy as well. She was especially spiteful to her sister, Rose, who had such a sweet temper and gentle nature that people wondered how they could be sisters. Well, the widow favoured her eldest daughter. Besides being similar in temperament, Fanchon had another desire that her mother had, and that was to be a grand lady. The widow was not rich, but whatever money she had, she spent on Fanchon. She had the best of everything and was so spoilt by her mother that she did no work at all in the house. Rose, on the other hand, was treated like a servant. She wore her sister's cast-off dresses, cleaned the grates, scrubbed the floors, and each morning trudged a mile or so to the village well to draw water. But no matter how hard she worked, she remained gentle and kind. Early one morning, Rose set out with her pitcher as usual. When she reached the well, she was surprised to find an old woman there. Rose saw how bent her shoulders were and how tattered her shawl was, and she gave her a sweet smile as she set about filling her pitcher. "Will you give me a drink of water from your pitcher?" asked the old woman when Rose's task was done. "Of course I will," said Rose. "You can have all the water you want. Sit down, madam, rest a while and drink your fill." Now the old woman was really a fairy in disguise. So many reports of Rose's kindness had reached her ears that she had come to see for herself if they were true. After she had drunk the water, the fairy said, "You are as kind and gentle as people say you are. I have not been disappointed. Now I would like to bestow a gift upon you." Rose, of course, had no idea that it was a fairy speaking, and she said quickly, "I want nothing from you, dear lady. No, please do not try to give me anything. All I did was a simple kindness." "And for that simple kindness," said the fairy, "I mean to give you a precious gift. Whenever you open your mouth to speak, flowers and jewels will fall from your lips." Smiling, Rose picked up her pitcher and returned home, thinking that the poor old woman could not have possibly meant what she said. Her mother was waiting for her at the bottom of the garden. "You lazy good-for-nothing!" she screamed when she saw Rose. "You've been gossiping, I'll be bound. The fire's out and your sister is waiting for you to clean her shoes." "I'm sorry, but I met—" Rose began, and then stopped as sweet-smelling flowers and a shower of rubies dropped from her lips onto the ground at her feet. Her mother bent down and picked up the rubies only, for the beautiful flowers meant nothing to her. Rose watched her, too astonished to speak, although she remembered clearly what the old woman had said. "Well, these rubies are real!" cried the widow. "What's all this?" And changing her mind about dealing Rose a slap, she took her arm instead and rushed her into the house. There Rose began to tell of her meeting with the poor old woman at the well. As she spoke, flowers and precious stones dropped from her lips until every inch of the kitchen table glinted and sparkled. "You're bewitched, child," cried her mother, beside herself with envy and greed as she saw the rubies and diamonds and precious gems. "Why should such good fortune happen to you? Now if only it had happened to my dear Fanchon instead." And she shouted loudly for her unpleasant daughter to come to the kitchen. When Fanchon saw the jewels and heard the story, she pinched Rose cruelly and hard out of jealousy, and her mother said, "We must think what to do so that you can win a similar gift for yourself." "Just as long as you don't expect me to walk a mile to the well," said Fanchon. "Such a walk over rough ground would ruin my slippers." "But that is just what you must do," cried her mother at last. "Tomorrow morning you must take the pitcher to the well. If you see that old woman with the bent shoulders and shawl, do anything she asks. Then she'll reward you in the same way as she has rewarded that sister of yours." The next morning, with her mother's help, Fanchon managed to rise early. "What a nuisance," the girl grumbled as her mother helped her into one of her prettiest dresses. "You know how I hate walking." "Never mind," said her mother. "Think of the reward." "There's one thing, though," said Fanchon when she was ready. "I'm not going to carry that common-looking pitcher that Rose takes. I'll take the silver flagon. Then people will know that I'm not a servant." There was an ugly scowl on Fanchon's face when she reached the well. Her slippers were pinching her, and the silver flagon had proved heavy to carry. Besides, she was so lazy that any kind of exercise increased her bad temper. To make matters worse, there was no sign of the old woman her mother had said would be there. Instead, standing by the well was a tall, handsome lady, richly dressed and with an air of command about her. Fanchon stared at her rudely, and the lady smiled and said, "When you've filled your flagon from the well, will you give me a drink?" "I will not," retorted Fanchon. "Why should I? You look as if you could afford servants. I'm not your servant. If you want a drink, get it yourself." Now the richly dressed lady was really the fairy who had spoken to Rose, though of course Fanchon had no way of knowing this. "You are not very polite," said the fairy, as Fanchon turned away from her. "What I am has nothing to do with you," said Fanchon over her shoulder. "So mind your own business." "Such bad manners," said the fairy, "deserve one of my more special gifts. With every word you speak, toads and vipers will drop from your lips." Fanchon paid very little attention to her words. Certain now that the old woman was not going to appear, she set off for home without even filling her flagon with water. As soon as she was within sight of her house, her mother came running down the road to greet her. "Well," she gasped, all out of breath and trembling with excitement. "Did you see her? Did she reward you for your kindness?" "She wasn't there," Fanchon replied angrily, and then stopped, for out of her mouth had dropped 3 fat toads and 3 wriggling snakes. "It's all the fault of that sister of yours," stormed the widow when Fanchon was inside the house. No, don't say another word," she added quickly, for already the floor was covered with toads and vipers, as Fanchon poured out her story. "Just wait till I lay my hands on her." But when the angry widow began searching the house for her daughter, Rose was nowhere to be found. She had heard and seen all that had happened to Fanchon, and she knew that her mother would put all the blame on her and beat her cruelly. Trembling with fear, she put her few belongings into a little bag and fled into the forest. Too frightened to return home, Rose wandered about the forest for the rest of the day, and then, as darkness began to fall, lay down under a tree. So unhappy was she by now that she could not stop herself from beginning to cry. Her gentle weeping disturbed the little birds, and they flew down to try and comfort her. But for once, Rose could take no pleasure in their soft, pretty feathers. She sobbed the louder, and the sound of her weeping caught the ear of the king's son as he rode homewards after a day's hunting. His astonishment was great when he came upon the beautiful girl alone in the forest. "Who are you? Where do you come from?" asked the prince as he came up to her. "I've never seen you before." "That is not likely, sire," Rose began, smiling in spite of her sadness. As she spoke, rubies and flowers fell from her lips onto the grass. She stopped immediately, but the prince, recovering from his surprise, begged her to tell him her story. Well, by the end of it, the prince was more than half in love with Rose. He had long been searching for a girl as gentle and kind as Rose, and to find one whose every word produced a precious stone was wonderful indeed. He took her back to his palace, and by the end of the week he had made her his princess. The news of her sister's good fortune soon reached Fanchon. For very good reason, she had spoken very little since the day she visited the well, but now she could not contain herself, and toads and vipers hopped and crawled all over the kitchen as she raged on and on. At last, her mother could bear it no longer, and she drove the miserable girl from the house, saying it would be best for both of them if Fanchon lived alone, for then she'd be able to hold her tongue. She was right, of course, and from that day onwards, the proud, spiteful Fanchon lived all by herself in a hut on the edge of the forest, and never once did she dare to open her mouth again. The end. Well, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully see you again soon. Take care and stay safe. Bye!